So I'd like to ask our panelists to come up. We are extremely privileged to have as our moderator the truly brilliant director and producer of the Rational Middle series, the founder of the Rational Middle, Gregory Kallenberg, a great documentarian, and I won't take up any more time, and I will turn it over to him to introduce our panel and start the conversation. Gregory?
Great. Thank you, Bill. Are you good on this? Yep. Okay, awesome. Bill, and if you would, I request that you call my wife and tell her that exact intro to her. That would help me out tremendously. Also, give a hand to Bill Squadron for his star turn in the documentary. And thank you to OEP for having us, and it's pretty amazing. Before I let the panel introduce themselves, I just want to let everybody know that rashmiddle.com is where you can find all these films. The films have been seen over 4 million times. You can also find them on Amazon. What's most important is that the films can be and should be utilized as a catalyst for a civil solutions-based discussion. That's what we're all about. And so to really continue that discussion beyond the film is this incredible panel that we're going to be tackling today. And again, just know that the task for you guys is we are going to untie the Gordian knot of the energy transformation in 45 minutes. So no pressure on any of that.
We're ready.
Okay, I love that. That's a good attitude. Sangina, why don't we start with just a quick intro for who you are and where you're from.
Okay, my name is Sangina Wright. I currently am with NRDC as their senior clean energy innovation advocate. Prior to that, I spent more than a decade on Capitol Hill working for the Committee of House Science.
Cool. Sasha.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm Sasha Mackler. I lead the energy program at the Bipartisan Policy Center. We're an institution here in town that does policy research and advocacy really associated with a number of the dimensions connected to the energy transition. We do policy research, we do a lot of convenings, and we do advocacy and outreach with policymakers in Capitol Hill and the administration, really trying to, the goal of what we do is to bring the best evidence and data and facts to policy conversations that we think have an opportunity to impact in the near term, the direction and the pace of the energy transition. And we work with partners across the political spectrum from, the energy industry today to the energy industry of tomorrow, technology innovators and entrepreneurs, the financial community, the environmental community, and then former and current political leaders from the Republican and the Democratic Party. Our goal is to really find that common ground that was highlighted in the video, not to eliminate the partisanship in these conversations, but to understand the partisanship, and then to see if we can craft policies that take into account the perspectives of everybody who's sitting around the table and who has a stake in these discussions. And we're focused on issues like energy innovation, permitting reform, technology development and deployment, climate policy, energy policy writ large. And I think, we'll get into this more, but I think the good news is there is a lot of bipartisan alignment on these issues, and that's what we're trying to identify and pull forward.
Gretchen.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Watkins. I'm president of Shell USA, based in Houston, Texas. I've been with Shell for about 5 years, but I've been 33, 34 years in the industry. And just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. It's opportunities like this where we as Shell can engage with a wide variety of stakeholders in energy, in the energy space that really help us learn, help us understand, but also help, I think, the overall energy transition happen faster with more understanding. So, and thanks to my fellow panelists, Sasha and Sangina and Gregory.
I'm going to just jump right into this. And Sasha, you brought up the B word, which is bipartisan, here in DC. And I am curious just to give context to the panel and the discussion. What is that current state of bipartisanship that you say that maybe is a little bit better than what we see out there in our newspapers or on our websites?
Yeah, well, so I think it's important to understand this is a politically fraught topic. I think we all understand that. But I would also say that if you look at the direction of travel that we've witnessed on climate and clean energy over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, I think is positive. I mean, we are seeing increasing engagement from Democrats and Republicans on this topic. And it's not just me that says it. I think the proof is in the pudding. If you look at what's been accomplished at the federal level on energy and climate policy over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of progress. We can rattle off a couple of bills: the Energy Act of 2020, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act. Those were really monumental steps forward from a policy perspective, driving increased focus and federal investment and attention onto this energy transition challenge. And they were bipartisan bills, it's important to note, and none of them had climate in their title, but all of them in some form or fashion really focus on the energy challenge. Now there's a fourth bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was probably the biggest bill that we've passed on energy and climate-related issues. It had a really significant, I think we're all aware, clean energy tax package that will direct, I think the number is kind of unknown because it's open-ended, but half a $1 trillion or more towards the energy transition through technology incentives. That bill was not bipartisan in how it was passed. It was passed through a Democratic-only reconciliation maneuver. But I will say that, having spent an enormous amount of time working on those issues on Capitol Hill over the last few years, the core policies that were in the Inflation Reduction Act were really developed on a bipartisan basis through committee work over a series of several Congresses. And so while the bill itself was not bipartisan, I think a lot of those ideas that found their way into that package were bipartisan. And maybe I'll just say one other thing, maybe to provoke some comment from my colleagues. If you look ahead, I think the bipartisan opportunity continues. The surround sound with the election coming and with COP now, there is a lot of noise in the system on energy and climate. But if you look at particular issues that can really make a difference on climate and the energy transition, there is a lot of shared alignment and agreement there that we can talk about, and I look forward to talking about. And if you even look at the Republican Party, which has historically been maybe the more sort of resistant to engaging this issue, over the last few years, they've developed in the House through former Speaker McCarthy, I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that momentum, a set of pillars on climate. Maybe the solutions are different than what you would see from the environmental community or from the Democrats, but they've engaged the issue and they're working on their own set of ideas, and I think that's really healthy, and I think there's a lot we can work with there.
So, Sangina, I see you nodding a lot slowly. And I never know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
we'll find out.
But I mean, on the bipartisan sort of context sort of setting, do you feel that we're in a good place, a bad place, or an indifferent place when it comes to bipartisanship, especially when it comes to what we're going to be talking about, which is the energy transition?
When you look at the news, they definitely paint us in a much worse place from if you pull the curtains back of the activities that are taking place on Capitol Hill. As he pointed to, committee activities, a lot of times, depending on the committee, is cross collaboration between the two sides to come up with sound legislation. My work at the House Science Committee actually, I worked on provisions for the Energy Act of 2020 and CHIPS and Science, and those activities were meant as a bipartisan effort for both sides of staffers who begin those collaborative efforts and advocate to their members that these are good policies and why you should support them. So those conversations, as he also may start several Congresses before we actually see that bill come to a floor. That said, I think we can also point to maybe the recent House Energy Water Act that passed the House. Not the substantive bill itself, but perhaps the amendments that did not make it out of the House. Amendments that tried to rescind money or completely take away the funding for ARPA-E or OSED or other programs of that nature. And you saw large amounts of Republicans vote no on those programs that are usually viewed as liberal programs. So I think that is a signal that there is progress that is taking place for more bipartisan activities to take place in the future.
So Gretchen, you represent the corporate side of this. I mean, this is certainly the NGO and the wonky, brainy, think tanky side of it. On the corporate side of it, are you seeing that same sort of? I mean, are things getting back in balance? Were things never out of balance when it comes to that approach towards energy transition?
Well, I think there is definitely, I would say, a coming together that I see that that reflects what my colleagues said. And I think when I come to Washington, D.C., I always make a point of speaking to lawmakers and policymakers on both sides of the aisle, because I think it's important that we as industry, we as Shell, are part of kind of driving that collaboration and that sort of compromise that I think needs to happen. There's a lot of things that both sides agree on that we can speak into. I mean, I think both sides agree that stimulating the economy in a positive way is a good thing. Creating jobs is a good thing. Lowering emissions is a good thing. And so when you get into the details that things start to get a little bit, gritty. But I do believe there's a lot that both sides agree on, and we try to speak into that. I mean, another thing Sasha and I were just talking about before we got up here is permitting. I mean, we're seeing a backlog of permitting, not just for oil and gas, traditional hydrocarbons, but for wind and solar. And so, can we work on freeing up the system so that investment can happen that really will advance the energy transition across the space?
So I'm going to stick with you, because I think the other thing that we need to do to really set the context for this discussion is talk about energy security, right? It's kind of a crazy world out there. For anyone not reading the news, it's a crazy world out there. But when you look at energy security and the energy transformation, how do you balance that out? And does one take precedence over the other? Because again, this room is lit by energy, and there's an energy transition that's take place. How do you sort of put in balance, especially from where you sit, energy security and the energy transformation?
Yeah. We really see it as both has to happen. We need energy security, we need energy affordability, we need energy access, and we need clean energy. And so all of that needs to happen as part of this transformation that we're going through. And I think when you look back over time and you see how our energy usage has changed, right? We can go back to when we were burning wood for heat and warmth, and steam power, and coal power and gasoline power, and now natural gas and solar and wind. I mean, there's been this huge evolution over many, many years. That's going to continue to happen, and I think that transformation needs to happen in a way that is allowing everybody to have affordable, clean, accessible energy. And I think that one word, everybody, is really important, because we're very much learning, but also leaning into making sure that this transformation happens for everybody, that it's not just for people that can afford a Tesla or just for people that can put solar panels on their roofs. It's actually for everybody. And so I think that although not always in harmony, there are tensions there for sure. That's something that we're really, really focusing on.
Well, jumping off that idea, really, which is, you have Gretchen really talking about the intricacies of the energy system, making sure that energy system is available for everyone. Sasha, thinking about policymakers, corporations, NGOs that are out there, and even the general public, how do you start to create at least a pathway so that there can be collaboration between these entities that actually creates a constructive solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I could, I'll just jump on one of the important points that Gretchen made, which is really when we think at the BPC, and this is something I believe really fundamentally, when you think about the energy transition challenge, climate is an important part of it, but it's connected to security and affordability of energy. And when we start to break it apart and deal with just one component of the challenge in isolation, you start to, first of all, lose the coalition if you over-index on one issue rather than another. And you also potentially start to design policies that are not going to be as effective as they could be. And one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the policy agenda as it connects to and relates to the energy transition is that if the lights are going out or if people are cold, you're not going to be able to have a conversation about climate and the energy transition. There are some fundamental issues that we need to solve for as part of this. And if you just focus on one piece, you're not going to actually be able to put together the formula for an effective policy agenda. And we saw that actually with the invasion of Ukraine or for example, when Europe was scrambling for its energy, they didn't care where it was going to come from. We just knew they needed to get it. And I think it's just a reminder for all of us that we have to solve for those issues to even have the chance to really drive the energy transition over time. So that's sort of my soapbox on that, which I think is just an important reminder as we have this conversation. And then then I think maybe moving to like your question, which was how do we create the space for those discussions? I don't think there's any magic in that. I mean, it does really depend on, I think, finding a place and creating an environment where stakeholders feel like they have a voice, where their issues and priorities can be heard and balanced across, a whole set of priorities. And, thinking about ways in which we can use analytics and dialogue in a way that, for a certain amount of the conversation, really take the politics out of it. My model is better than your model, or those sorts of things. That can be a distraction. In a lot of ways, it's really finding stakeholders who agree on the problem and then designing processes where different perspectives can be heard, but also everyone sort of agrees that a solution needs to be put in place. That's sort of the starting point.
So Sangina, coming from where you come from, is this sort of in line with the way you guys think and the way that you guys address these issues, and more importantly, the way you want the issues addressed, right? From the corporate side, policy side, community side.
Where we sit at NRDC, we do a lot of advocating, but our advocating is building coalitions. Coalitions with individuals, like he stated, have a common idea of what the problem might be and want to come together to find solutions. So we're building coalitions with groups that perhaps you would think we would not partner with or want to have long dialogues with. But we're doing that work because we understand that to create meaningful solutions and to advocate for policies that are just and that have far-reaching ability to create prosperity for all and protect our environment as well is going to require that we bring all partners to the table. With that said, we're very also focused that we bring communities that have been left out of the conversation historically to the table, and that we give a voice to them because they are often our frontline communities, our energy communities, and that this transition is going to they've either been greatly impacted by previous energy forms or current energy forms, or that the new forms of energies, clean energies, might have some impact on their lives, and we want them to lend a voice into how we're shaping this transition. So that's work, yes, that we're doing as well.
So kind of working backwards from there, because you certainly have communities out there that have been disenfranchised by the energy transition in the past, right? We got to take care of them in the future. Go a little deeper when you say we're building coalitions that you wouldn't necessarily expect for us to build. What does that mean?
We're very involved with industry, speaking to manufacturers, those that are in traditionally very carbon emission heavy fields. So we're having the discussions with the steel manufacturers, the aluminum manufacturers. We're having discussions with perhaps individuals that are a little less willing to embrace an energy transition, to understand why, what are the barriers, what are the gaps, what are the concerns, what more should we be doing or advocating for to truly make this transition just for all.
And so, Gretchen, we're talking about a collaborative approach from an NGO, right? I mean, where does Shell and where do you stand when it comes to that collaboration and how that works, so that you're also connecting the dots, so that not only are we moving forward with energy transformation, but that everyone's being taken care of at the same time?
Yeah, I think I would say there in our view, there's three really necessary things to have if we're going to succeed here. The first one is that collaboration, and so the collaboration is, industry, it's society, it's the communities where we live and work, it's government, it's academic institutions, those that influence policy and are active in the policy and advocacy space. All of those need to come together, because if it's just industry, or if it's just government, or if it's just society, it won't happen. It won't happen nearly as efficiently, and certainly not nearly as quickly. So collaboration is key. I think the second piece is policy, which we've talked about already, which and I think there's good examples of good policy that have been put in place, and there's going to be more. There's going to need to be more. And then I think the last one is just that just and sort of equitable transition. So making sure that it's moving everyone together, not bits and pieces. And so, how do we think about that? I mean, we really spend a lot of time. Is that my microphone?
I think
Okay.
I think they're moving the
I was
catering
suddenly
out.
like, what? What is that
I think,
noise?
I think, yes, I get your last chance to get chicken piccata, people. So, yes.
Sorry. We really spend quite a bit of time listening, which is why these panels are good for me to be able to hear from you guys, but also you guys, which we'll get to later. Because I think when you think about how we impact a community, how we can kind of enroll them and bring them with us, but also have them bring us with them, it really is very much of a listening game. And I would, there's a couple of places where we've done that, I think, well, and then there's some places where we probably need to keep working on it. It's not something we have a silver bullet for, but example of a place where we've done that well is up in Pennsylvania. We have a new polyethylene plant that we started before we even took the investment decision on this. It's just outside of Pittsburgh. We knew we needed to have some population of people that could work there. And so we started looking at, well, how can we build a program at a local community college, Beaver County Community College, that would train people to be operators at the plant. And so as we started building this joint curriculum, we started also engaging with the community and realizing this is a part of the country that's lost over the last decade or so about 20,000 jobs, because jobs have moved away as the steel industry has wound down. And so we started thinking it's not only about us attracting talent, it's actually about us being part of a community where we're giving people options to stay where they are. And a lot of these people have been working on their family farms for generations. There's a lady named Emma McDonald who is going through that program right now, and we've already offered her a job at our plant. And she's from a fourth generation farmer in that area. And so we've got examples where I think we've really done some good work there. But again, we're by no means perfect, and so it's a constant sort of learning process, I would say.
So Sasha, I mean, you're literally sitting between, corporate America and the NGO world, and you've heard two really amazing sort of insights from both of them as to how and where they work together. I'm curious how you not only align that, but then leverage it to its greatest power to get that momentum we need for that energy transformation.
Yeah, well, the one observation that I would make, and it's a reminder to all of us who work in this space, I think, is that, collaboration is the starting point and it's needed, right? That's what we're hearing here. But it's not always it's not always just a kumbaya, like it's good for everybody. I mean, to actually make progress, that collaboration requires trust, but it also requires an open mind, right? So sometimes the answer may not be the one that you come to the conversation with, and you're going to get things, and some of your priorities are going to show up in the final outcome, and some of them won't, right? You need to be willing to, as came out in some of the interviews in your video, which I thought was really sort of insightful, was you need to be willing to kind of, compromise, trade a few things away to get a few things that you want. That is actually collaboration. It's not just holding hands and talking a good story. It's really doing the work. And, I think across this panel, you're starting to hear, there's an openness to that. And I think you see that in a lot of tables that get set and conversations that are had. But that's an important part of it.
Yeah, and so Gretchen, when you hear, and again, it's almost like Sasha's saying that we should all be, dare I say, in the rational middle. But that idea of sort of everyone being at that table, that compromise, that shaving at the margins that Secretary Baker talked about, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, for sure. Again, I think the reason we have worked with you, Gregory, to put together these films and now use them as opportunities to start a conversation is that we wind up having a much different conversation than if Shell shows up and says, here's the way things are, and we're the energy company. We actually have, approach this, I think, with a fairly big dose of humility, where yes, we know a lot about energy, but no one has gone through an energy transformation like this is happening today. And so all of us being sort of learning together, but also learning from each other, I think is absolutely critical. And again, as a company, we can provide clean energy, low emissions products, but if the demand isn't there, then we have a problem. As society can't just demand if there's no supply of products, and government can't just pass policies and expect money will flow. So it all has to come together. Yeah.
And so, Sangina, again, with what Gretchen is talking about, which is this openness for dialogue and for a better understanding of the communities. What do you want when you think about the policymakers, you think about the corporations, and the communities? What do you want the focus to be? What do you want them to focus on in order for people to get taken care of, and at the same time for us to move forward on an energy transformation?
I personally believe that the energy transition has to be human-centered. So we have to focus on the people. And with that, that's focusing not only on their health and their local environments, but also their economic prosperity. So all of those things of bringing jobs to their communities, improving their quality of life, I think that's where we start with. And I believe across the board, that's where we begin to do the work to find the solutions, to make the compromises, to put forth solid public policy in this space. To Sasha's point, where the compromise comes in, if you've ever get an opportunity to look at drafts of the early versions of the Energy Act of 2020, or even Chips and Science, you can actually track where the changes were made and where compromises were made to where the final bill was passed. This is not a new process on Capitol Hill, and people do it often. But so much focus is given to the last bill, but not how we got to that bill. And if you speak to staffers, especially committee staffers, they'll tell you that process begins long before the public is even aware of a bill. We're speaking to communities of diverse voices that come from academia, science, industry, NGOs. We're trying to get that variety of voices so we understand the product that we're putting out is a representation of the country. So I think it's a misnomer where we believe that only what is being headlined on the infighting, that actual activities of bipartisanship or collaborations or compromise aren't taking place. That's the only way that these bills that he highlighted over the last 5 to 4 years ever came to be was because of the activities of the individuals behind the scene making those compromises for us to have these large legislations that are pushing climate agendas today.
And I'll tell you, that is super interesting insight. And Sasha, I'm curious, with that insight in mind, right? Same question that I've asked Gretchen, which is what should the policymakers and the corporations be focused on that and again, we are aware of the ugly process, but it seems to come to a good end sometimes, right? What should they be focused on right now?
Well, so first of all, I just think it's so great to hear your sort of the way you describe the process. I mean, the process works, right? I mean, it does work. It's messy. Maybe it could be moving faster. I certainly think we should be moving faster, but we do see the results of these bills, and I think they're really good bills. So that's point number one. The other thing that I would say about the rational middle, which I think you all know from my perspective, coming from the Bipartisan Policy Center, I'm a big supporter of that philosophy. But one other point I would make about bipartisanship and sort of the middle is that it doesn't have to be a watering down. It's not like the sort of the milquetoast middle that is what we mean by bipartisanship. You can actually have, I think, a bipartisan bill that combines a super progressive idea with a super conservative idea that comes together in a bipartisan way, because sometimes the better idea is the conservative idea, and on one issue, and a progressive one on another. So we don't have to water everything down to make progress in a bipartisan way. I think we have to remember that. And then in terms of what should we be focused on now, I mean, we can talk about the specifics of policy, but maybe at a higher level, what I think is happening now in this conversation, which I think is great, is that we're sort of pivoting to a new paradigm on policy making with the energy transition. In my view, we've got post IRA, post all those bills that I just walked through. There's kind of a little bit of a white space now around what comes next. The traditional or sort of historical view on how we're going to address climate, going all the way back to sort of Waxman-Markey, sort of 15 years ago, this sort of cap and trade philosophy, which I was a part of, sort of this sort of economy-wide approach to decarbonization, either through capping emissions or pricing emissions across the economy. I don't think we're headed to a policy framework like that anytime soon. Not that I don't think we need one, I do, but I think the politics aren't sort of conducive to that right now. We haven't made the sale politically on it, and that was a frame that was really focused on making conventional energy more expensive so that clean energy could compete against it. And I don't think we're headed there. And so the policy approach that has worked here in the US has been one where we are making clean energy cheaper so it can compete against conventional energy. That's what's worked politically, and I think we're going to see more of that as we look ahead. And then maybe the final point, which I'd love to hear what my colleagues think, is the other, I think, change. So this white space that I was talking about is really this, we don't know. There's not really a consensus now, or at least a shared view across all the stakeholders. What are those next sets of policies? There's good ideas out there, and I think we have to do the work now to see what's going to sort of emerge as some of the more the ideas that have the most traction. But I think we're shifting from a set of time period where industry and the public sector have really kind of been in tension on this issue to a moment where I think we're aligned on what needs to happen. And now the question is, how do we make it happen? How do we get the capital off the sidelines? How do we get the Shells of the world and the utility companies to really lean into this and feel like their future is connected to a good policy environment where decarbonization is at the heart of it? And I think that public-private collaboration there's a new opportunity for that now, and I think that's the starting point.
Yeah, and so Gretchen, I am interested in your feelings about the white space. Granted, you don't have to name drop Waxman Markey like Sasha just did.
You know,
That's right,
Hey.
saying that you've been working on the Waxman Markey bill. I think
It's
that's
not a
great.
good thing.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a long-
But that idea of that white space, having that voice sitting at that table, how does that resonate, and what do you do with that to help make sure that we're thinking about things the right way and we're all making sure that we're moving forward in a way that's constructive to everyone?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's certainly inside of Shell, one of the things we're doing right now is just making sure we really understand what's been passed, right? And it's not, some of the laws don't have the ink dry quite yet, but we've just dug right straight in to see what's in there and how will it benefit some investment decisions that we've got on the horizon. And so a couple things that I think you'll see us doing. One is we have been looking at carbon capture as an essential part of something that can happen reasonably quickly to decarbonize industry today. And so the Inflation Reduction Act has passed some parts of it that actually make it an economic investment, which is important for a company. We need to be able to invest and make a return. I mean, that's what we do. So that's one thing. I think the other thing we've been looking at is what role does hydrogen play? And I think hydrogen plays a lot of different roles in different parts of the country. And right now, kind of the place where I think you're going to see it impact most quickly is places where you can produce it and use it right next to each other, because transporting it is not easy. It's not economic. It's not easy from a science. It's very small molecules. It leaks very easily. So you can't use existing infrastructure. So I think we're sort of combing through all of that. The other thing I would say, though, about policy is that the Inflation Reduction Act is great in that it incentivizes us to spend more to make more supply. The demand side is not incentivized. And so you'll see part of the reason I think we'll see hydrogen develop potentially more slowly is because if the demand isn't there, the supply isn't going to be there. And so there's no silver bullet here. So I'm not sort of saying duh or anything. I mean, it's a complex issue, but I do think there's some policy space for some demand side policy on some of the things I've just mentioned.
And if I can just speak to that real quick, NRDC does a lot of work in advocating and leaning in on the hydrogen hubs and DAC hubs as well. But for her comment about the demand side, we are also looking at that because we noticed that DOE put up a sum of money for the demand side efforts, but we don't know if that's enough to fill that hole or meet that gap. So yeah, that's a common goal I think that is across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Sangina, I'm going to stick with you because I would like we kind of tiptoed close to the just transition. How do you sort of figure in when we're still talking about policy, we're still talking about corporations, we're still talking about everyone working together. How do you sort of put a voice into it to make sure that everyone is taken care of the best way possible?
I think it's important for those of us that are already very active in this space. We have to identify partners that we need to bring to the table, or what is the barrier keeping them from these conversations. We have to be more intentional about our equity work and community engagement as well, and not see that necessarily as a burden to perhaps a project being erected or a easy way to get a project green lighted. It's a very intentional endeavor to involve in community engagement because every community is different and communities have different factions within them. But you need to speak to all of these individuals that are going to be impacted by an energy project in their community to see what is keeping them from wanting to speak to us. Is it a lack of trust? If it is a lack of trust, then we have to do the work to build that trust. And building that trust is having these conversations that might be uncomfortable and where we might not necessarily agree with everything is said, but we have to work through that to come up with some outcomes. And the outcomes might be economic, and the outcomes might be somehow improving their school systems, job equity, their housing. It's like it has a widespread of what community needs are, and we have to do the work to understand, because they are our partners, communities, how we bring them into this conversation so the transition is just.
Cool. And we're about to get to questions from you guys, so hopefully you have some good ones. I've got a bunch more for anyone who is shy about asking. But I want to ask Gretchen, and really it's a question, and we'll go down and then we'll go to the audience questions, is what are the ultimate benefits of a clean energy future? And I'm curious, like, and I don't want to put a wet towel on this beautiful campfire that we built, but the idea of what happens if we fail? Like, what does it look like when we succeed, and what happens if we don't focus on this? How about this? We won't be so negative. If we don't focus on it, what happens? But what happens if we actually do this right and we do work in concert? And Gretchen, I'll go to you, and we'll go down here, and then we'll go to the audience questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we get it right, we wind up, first of all, lowering emissions and meeting the goals that many of us have, that the country has, of being net zero by 2050. That's a goal that Shell has. So I think if we do it right, we hit that target of being net zero by 2050, and we protect the world from having worse climate issues than we have today. I think we also ensure that we have that, we crack the nut on that trilemma of affordable, accessible, and clean energy. Because the affordability and the accessibility is so important here, and that's when you get back into the equitable conversation that we've been having here today too. So, and I think that we also it's a win-win-win-win-win in terms of all the different stakeholders that are involved, whether it be society, government, industry, et cetera. Everyone comes out a winner. And if that does happen, then you do have incredible economic benefits. You create jobs, you lift people up, and you make communities more well off, and so it can be it's a glorious picture, I think, that's possible. I think if it doesn't happen, I think the pitfalls, maybe I'll change your question a little bit. The pitfalls are going to be there's a whole lot of external factors that go into that shape the energy market. There's global wars, the Ukraine-Russia war, the war in the Middle East, global economic issues that shape how expensive or not expensive or accessible or not accessible energy is to people. And so I think that's one of those wild cards and a pitfall that we'll just have to be ready for. I also think it would be a real tragedy if we don't allow this to happen in a way that does move everybody forward. So it's a transition for the wealthy, but not so well off, or it's a transition for this country, but not other countries. And so I think it's not going to be smooth, because we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about all the dilemmas and the tensions and stuff. But I do think there's so many of us that recognize those, that, man, I would love to think we could go in eyes wide open and at least mitigate some of the big wild swings we might see on our journey.
I love that. Same question to you, Sasha.
Yeah, so I share a lot of the views that were just outlined, so I won't repeat them. Maybe to take a slightly different frame, of the 4 bills that I described, as I mentioned, one of them was not done on a bipartisan basis, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's the one that is currently, I think, a little bit of a political football right now. It's at risk, right? If there's a change in control in Congress, some of those provisions might get pulled back or changed in a way that's not helpful. So the first thing I would say is, for this to be successful, to hit our 2050 targets, we really need bipartisan policy, not just because it sounds good, but because it's durable. And we need durability because these are really big investments that the private sector needs to make, and they live a long time in the market. And so the signals that are sent to investors, to companies, need to be strong, and trusted and long-lived. So the bipartisan part of this, I think that a successful story to the energy transition policy agenda starts with bipartisanship, not because it feels good, because that's what's going to actually deliver on what we're trying to do. So that's number one. And then the second part, I think, thinking through my American hat is, I think a good outcome here from an energy policy agenda is one where we figure out these technology innovations, we can bring down the costs here at home because we have the ingenuity, we have the free markets, we have the right corporate culture here, so we can deliver it for ourselves, and then we can bring it to the rest of the world. And that economic opportunity for America is huge. And there's a massive political payback that will come from that success that we will enjoy here at home. And we will also be able to help the rest of the world achieve their economic, their social, and their climate goals. Because success when it comes to climate and energy transition is not less. It's not less energy. I think generally it's access to energy, because so much of the world is in energy poverty right now. If we can bring energy, clean energy to the world, it's going to be good for the world, and it's going to be good for America.
I love that. Sangina.
I want to echo what he said about American competitiveness. We really do have an opportunity to lean into clean energy innovation and be leaders in many spaces of technology. For example, clean steel, clean cement, these are things that we can export and build back our manufacturing strength here in this country and export them to other countries. Like you said, we could be leaders in this transition if we come together and find the solutions needed to put forth more public policy to drive innovation and improve cleaner economies. That said, also, I wanted to lean into the IRA piece. Well, yes, that was a partisan bill. I think 13 Republicans voted for it, right? I think, but
who's counting?
who's counting? I count that. I keep track of those numbers for some reason. Those numbers make me excited. But that said, we need to tell a better story of how even these partisan bills are being very impactful in red states. The IRA, the largest beneficiaries of that piece as to date are red states.
It's a really important point.
And then even IIJA, you put those two together, 2/3 of the benefits from those bills are going to red states. And then you also look back and think 9 out of the 10 clean energy manufacturing companies that are either planned or going to be deployed are in red states. So we have to do a better story of saying, yes, you might see this as partisan legislation, but it has nonpartisan benefits that do not matter what state you're in, that we can all have a piece of that pie. And if we're not telling that story, I think that's where we're not being truthful to constituents of how these policies are impactful to everybody. So with that said, I think if we lean in, we can be competitive. I think that we can bring prosperity to communities that have been left out of this equation. I think that we can improve, I think it will trickle down to our schools that need to be focused on as well, and our infrastructure. I think it will have a far-reaching impact for the things that we don't even believe connect back to the energy transition. It has the potential to change if we truly lean in and find pathways forward to, as someone said in your document, move the ball forward.
I love that. We're going to go to questions from the audience, but we're going to have a lightning round. I'm not even looking at Jordan because Jordan's going to start waving his hands. But the idea, if we could, after we do a few questions from the audience, a lightning round that really looks at the fact, are you optimistic that we're going to achieve this future? And again, you have some amazing thought leaders in the room, right? what is that piece of wisdom or that marching order they need when they leave here to go do something to help move the ball forward? So why don't we go to questions from the audience? Yes. And would you just say your name and I'll repeat your question for the streaming audience too. Oh, there you go. Well, you got a mic. Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Siri Hedreen. I'm a reporter with S&P Global. Question for Gretchen. I saw, just the reports that Shell is cutting some of its low-carbon jobs and shifting priorities within its low-carbon business, and also dialing back on some of its hydrogen investments. I was wondering if you could comment on that, and also if Shell is less bullish on hydrogen than it was a year ago.
I think the stories you've seen about us cutting jobs in the low carbon space are accurate, but I would put them very much in the context of what we generally do across our portfolio all the time, which is we look at how we're planning for various projects. We look at the economics of various projects. As they mature, sometimes the economics get better. As they mature, sometimes the economics don't get better. And so this is a case where we had a few projects that the economics were not getting better, and we've decided to stop those projects. Some of them were just slowing down, but as that happens, we don't need as many people. And so this is actually something that's happening across our company. As a company, we have earlier this year announced not a change in strategy, but actually, I would say some more aggressive financial targets. And so we are reducing our overall capital spend by $2 to $3 billion a year. We're reducing our overall operational expenses by $2 to $3 billion a year. And we're going to do all of this in the next 18 months. So it's a pretty short, we're calling it a sprint inside of Shell. So we're sprinting to really rein in our capital, rein in our operating costs. And in order to do that, we need to pick some projects that have great economics, and we need to stop some that don't have great economics. And so that's what you're seeing when you're seeing some of our jobs go away, is that we're picking some winners and stopping some ones that aren't competing. I would say from a hydrogen perspective, we're still very much committed to hydrogen as part of the energy transformation. We're building the world's biggest electrolyzer in Rotterdam, the Netherlands right now. We've got plans in place to do a hydrogen project on the Louisiana Gulf Coast where we already manufacture hydrogen and making that either blue or green over time so that we can either be the consumer or sell it to other companies that can consume it to lower their emissions. So no, we remain committed to hydrogen as we do to carbon capture, as we do to low carbon fuels. All of those I think we see as very much part of the future.
Cool. Next question. Yes.
Yes, my name is Ron Bethea. I'm president of the National Association of Blacks in Solar and the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative. And what we do, we work with all the African and African-American renewable energy companies doing business in the U.S. When we look at Build Back Better, Inflation Reduction Act, my question is, where is the Green Economic Development Plan for African-American banks, churches, institutions in this process? Because certainly, when we begin to look at this new green economy, and as the policymakers have laid out, this is an executive order. And if the politics change as it relates to the IRA, a lot of this stuff can be wiped out. Even the Office of Diversity and Equity in the Department of Energy. And when we look at the Justice 40 piece, only 4 state legislatures have passed the legislation to even codify it. So the governors can't take the money and do what they want to do in the red states. So if someone can respond to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Somebody equipped to respond to that idea of the IRA and as it relates, I guess even beyond the Justice 40 piece too. Sasha, have you guys looked at that?
Not in great detail. The one thing that I would say is that the EPA has a fund, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund at EPA. I think it's, you may know better than me, $27 billion that's really focused to get pushed out to the EPA into communities through green banks and other mechanisms. It's a big amount of money, and it's really meant to accomplish, I think, some of the priorities that you were just highlighting. I don't know where that stands currently in terms of where, how much has gone out the door and how much is, where things sit. But I think that's one of the places where you might find some of the resources that you were just pointing to.
One of the things I might add, is it Ron?
Yes.
Ron, is that, so one of the pieces of work that Shell's been active, we've been active in this space for a long time, but I would say over the last few years we've really put our foot on the accelerator is around supplier diversity. And so when we think about how we're spending our money, whether it's building a solar farm or a wind farm or a chemical plant, we're looking very closely at how we spend our money and allocating a certain amount of that money to be spent with minority-owned businesses. Over the last couple of years, we've managed to double that spend. Still not as high as it needs to be, but we're actively working that. And what I would tell you that we've learned is that it's not something you can sort of set up a one-year program and then check the box and move on. It is a real marathon. And what I can share with you a great story. There's a gentleman called Lee Jackson who 10 years ago came to Shell and said, I've been working offshore. I have an idea. I'd like to buy a supply vessel and be part of the industry that supplies the offshore oil and gas platforms, but I need some help starting my business. And we were the first contract that he signed. We gave him basically consequently a loan. He bought his first vessel. He now owns like 12 vessels, and he's one of the best competitors in that space and competes for business with all the big companies that are operating in the Gulf of Mexico. We've been his first and long-time customer and will continue to be. But it's that kind of, it's not just finding a company that's owned by a minority in the solar space or any energy space. It's actually sometimes finding someone that's got a great idea that you say, all right, we'll be your first customer. We'll sign a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year contract and we'll get you off the ground. And so we've been looking for opportunities to do that, and we'll continue to do that.
I love that. I think we have time for one more question. One more question. Yes.
Hi, Chris Knight with Argus Media. It's a question for Gretchen. Over the weekend, EPA released its final methane rule, and I saw your colleagues at BP said they supported the rule. I'm curious if Shell supports the rule and if you had any concerns about the final methane rule.
Yeah, I would say yes, we support the rule. We are not an operator onshore U.S., which is where most of the methane rule applies to. So we're the largest operator in the Gulf of Mexico, but our methane emissions there are almost nothing. And so we do support it, but it's not heavily impacting our company. I would just add to that, though, that as a company globally, we've signed up to some pretty aggressive methane reduction targets. We've already, I think, eliminated unnecessary flaring, and we have committed to, by 2025, a 0.2 intensity target, which we met actually 2 years ago. So we're below the target we set from a methane emission standpoint. That's not us putting our feet on the desk, though. We're going to continue to work it. But I think, overall, we're super supportive of reducing and eliminating methane emissions. I would call it table stakes for our industry.
I love it. Can I do my lightning round real quick? Okay, cool. All right. So I felt the music playing in the background, and a bill was coming up. So anyway, so the question is, right? 1, are you optimistic, right? And then 2, considering the thought leaders that are in the room, what is that advice we can give them that they can put in their pocket to go out there and keep moving that ball forward? So Gretchen, why don't we start with you?
So I'm optimistic because we can convene this kind of a crowd about this topic, and we can have this kind of conversation with 4 of us that come from very different parts of the energy conversation. And frankly, we can agree on a lot of things. Might not agree on everything all the time, but we can agree on a lot of things. That makes me optimistic. That makes me very optimistic. I would say the one thing to take away, the reason why I do this is that I always learn something when I do these sorts of things. I've learned today from the 3 of you, learned from some of the questions we got, what's on your mind. And so go away and think about how you can engage someone else to be more curious, to be in a learning state about this, because I think oftentimes people don't recognize that they are, even if they're unassociated with energy, they're part of it. So they can people can make decisions about what kind of products you buy, what kind of energy you use to power your homes, what kind of car you drive, how you think about materials that make up various things you own. All of that can be how you recycle. I mean, all of that can be part of is part of the solution. And so for those of you that are already in that space, how can we get more people in that space? That's there. It wasn't as lightning as I should have been.
No. It was awesome and beautiful. Sangina.
Oh, okay. What I'm excited about?
Well,
Or as
one are you optimistic, and then
optimistic
also
about?
that advice/marching orders that our audience can take with them as they leave this room to keep moving the energy transformation forward?
I'm optimistic that conversations like this will continue to grow and that we will have more opportunities to share and exchange information and ideas. I think that's necessary for us because we need to be able to stop the ebb and flow of climate and energy policy. We need policy to be consistent and consistency and clarity of this of public policy so we can meet the climate crisis. That said, I think leaving this room, I would say, kind of like Gretchen, have a conversation with someone that you normally would not be in your tent, someone that was outside of your organization. Go to the events and speak to the individuals that you know are clearly from another, probably not aligned with your political ideology, and find some way to have a conversation about topics that you do align on. I think making those cross-party coalitions larger and stronger, we can definitely influence policymakers or lawmakers to be more bipartisan. We'll have that influence as we build our coalitions to show that this is a shared interest.
I love it. That is beautiful. Sasha, high bar to
It
jump
is a
over
high
at this
bar.
point.
This is
That's
tough,
right.
These are tough acts to
That-
follow.
that's right.
So, am I an optimist? Yeah, I am an optimist. I believe in innovation, ingenuity, and I think we're gonna really find a way to get to net zero through a lot of technology, new technologies on the horizon. So I'm an optimist. I couldn't do what I do if I wasn't. And then maybe building on the thoughts on kind of where do we go from here, or advice. Avoid orthodoxy would be my advice. I mean, building on the sort of have an open mind, be in a learning state, try to talk to the other side. I think another dimension to that is avoid orthodoxy. Avoid thinking that what you believe is the solution is actually the solution, because that really, I think, that really is an inhibitor to change.
I love that. And before you guys give it up for this panel, just keep in mind what just happened. I mean, this is so incredible and so insightful and really so meaningful in this discussion. And hopefully you guys had as incredible a time out there as I did up here from the stage. Give them a hand. Thank you, Sangina, Sasha, and Gretchen.
Thanks, Greg.
Fantastic job. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Gregory. I think we can all agree that was a fantastic conversation. I do want to highlight a couple of things quickly before we go. Sangina made the point about people at the end of the day being something we need to keep in mind. I mean, we all spend a lot of time talking about tax incentives and subsidies and carbon pricing and all kinds of important issues. But at the end of the day, it really falls back to how it's going to affect people all over the globe. And I thought that was a great point. And I also want to underscore something Gretchen said about starting a conversation and being in a conversation. We've gotten to a point over the years where just doing that, it often seems hard, where it seems so polarized. People are talking at each other, calling names, pointing fingers. Literally just getting into the conversation and doing it respectfully and civilly and being open-minded, as Sasha just said, can lead to so many good things, and they have. And I actually think that when people talk about being an optimist, and we'll get to that in a second, as Gregory asked, we have more people who are well-meaning and want to find common ground than we have people who are screaming at the extremes and often get highlighted in the media. We just need to push forward, and all of us in this room and throughout the community need to be committed to doing that, and I think we can succeed. And it gets to your question about optimism. I actually was at a dinner last night in New York of a couple of dozen people from Wall Street and the banking community involved in clean energy project finance, investment bankers, private equity firms, venture capitalists. And this 2023 is not, I'm sure people know, it's been a challenging year in many respects for financing clean energy projects. And it was a robust and very frank conversation among a lot of these leaders. But at the very end, we went around the table and asked, what are you optimistic about? And every one of those 25 people had something very clear that they felt positive and optimistic about going forward. And one of them said that interest rates won't go up anymore. But I mean, you know, and a number of people, as Sasha pointed out, talked about innovation and technology and all of the strides we've made. And, you know, we sometimes forget, if you turn the clock back 15 years and you look at the state of things then, we are light years from there. And if you look forward and think about what we're capable of moving the ball even more quickly. And not a single person even mentioned the energy force represented by Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and even that, you know, is something we can all look forward to. But in any event, I do want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. I'd encourage you to be involved in our programs, but to do as everyone up here said, commit yourself to the kind of collaboration, cooperation, open-mindedness, compromise that we need to move this forward. So I, especially want to thank all of our panelists, Gretchen, Sasha, Sangina, and Gregory. Can we have a hand for them again, please? And I'd like to thank our OEP staff, Jordan and Julia and Jenna. You saw them coming in. They worked really hard on today's event, so thanks very much to you all. I want to wish all of you a great holiday season, encourage you to get as active and engaged as possible as we heard about today, and look forward to working with you as we go down the road. Thanks very much.
Thanks.